Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a creator request, which is where a smaller band gets in contact with me and asks me to check out their work. Today I got one from Lotus Thrones. They emailed me and said, if you're unfamiliar, Lotus Thrones is a solo project from Heath Rave, who is formerly in the bands Wolfhammer and Across Tundras. His roots are planted in the metal scene, but with this project he's aimed to meld uncompromising heavy tones with a melodic and experimental sound. Previous seasonal EPs released in 2021 and 2022 found him exploring influences of post-metal, synthwave, and doom. The prolific musician pushes things further with the new album, The Heretic Souvenir. So, we're going to be looking at the track Gore Orphanage from this upcoming album. Well, it was upcoming at one point. Now it is a month old. Let's dive into this and see what Lotus Thrones is bringing to the table. Lots of wobbly destructiveness to the sounds. I hope to hear this motif elsewhere in the track. I hope this isn't just an intro. Tom heavy, distortion heavy, atmospheric. Interesting layering on the vocals. There's an atonality as well, where the lead melody isn't in the same key as what the guitars are doing. Timing is really interesting here. Okay. Oh, we never did hear a return to that opening motif. It really wanted to fit the mood, but I do think it would have been cool to have played underneath the screaming section, our B part of the track. Interestingly, as gnarly as this is, it's also pretty straightforward. The production, how they got their guitar tones, and all this stuff. I'm not really great about giving information. I just don't have the experience making guitar tones and stuff. Um, there's a lot of really cool, intricate stuff that goes into that, and I'm going to touch on what the sounds are and how they're contributing to the track in a moment. But when you take that out of the picture and you look at just what is compositionally on the sheet music, so to speak, it's pretty straightforward, and interestingly, it also has an ABABCB pattern, or maybe after the bridge comes an AB. Um, but there's definitely a verse chorus. We have our bridge, and we end on another verse chorus. Um, and so we have a track that it does some interesting things, but also doesn't stray too far from what's comfortable. It's what's home, and I think that's really interesting. And we talk about bridge bands or bridge songs, music that helps somebody move from something more palatable to something less digestible. And I think this might be an interesting way to get into more noisier types of music if your home where you're used to listening to is something closer to rock and even a bit of metal. So let's dig into some details here. We start off the song with an atonal dissonant piano solo. Really interesting idea. Unfortunately, I don't really see what it has to do with the rest. And that's not to say that every section always needs to have some sort of through line to what comes before and after it, but it feels wholly separate from the song, in which it could be an interesting intro to the album if Gore Orphanage is track 2, but otherwise feels severely out of place, played so closely next to Gore Orphanage. Maybe there's some stuff I'm missing there, though. The atonality, though, and dissonance is present throughout the rest of the track. We have the guitars, which I'm not entirely sure that the notes that they're playing matter, and I don't think our two guitarists nor our bassist are all in the same key. Our vocalist is not in the same key as the rest of the instruments either. There's a sharp element of atonality throughout our verse, with a heavy emphasis on dissonance, where the note intervals that create harsh tensions between notes is more important than selecting specific notes. And that's why I say that I don't even know that they're in the same key, because I don't know that everybody's even playing notes that are similar to each other. They're just finding very dissonant tones and putting compression and distortion on them to amplify the dissonance and create some very gnarly, noisy textures behind the vocals, which the vocals themselves also have a bit of production put on them to give them extra bits of, well, they're hyper compressed. There's a bit of extra compression on them. They feel distant as well, and they're layered. The drums are the only thing that's actually coming through rather clear and crisp, which I suppose makes sense. Outside of like industrial music, I don't really think I've heard too many styles of music where you would actually compress or even put distortion on drum kits. I mean, you certainly can. I know I've heard it, but it's just not something very typical. So, where the rest of the song has a grit on it, the drum kit doesn't. And it feels a little separate from everything else, but I think the emphasis on the lower end, both musically, playing a lot of tom work, throughout the verse and chorus, but also on the production side, lowering the treble EQ so that even when we use the ride cymbal, it just isn't as present in the mix. Really helps allow the drums to get into the dirt with the rest of the instruments. It's a good choice. Though I do think, uh, man, what was your? Let me pull this up real quick. I don't know why that doesn't work. That should work. We'll do it this way then. Heath, yeah, dude, if you're watching this, you probably have already, but mess around with putting destructive effects on the drum kit. See what comes out of it. It may be garbage and you toss it in the bin, but it may be inspired. Um, you might find something interesting out of it. Um, Also, I highly suggest playing around with delay and reverb on the drums, especially when you're working with stuff like this. I've tried that in the past, and it actually really creates some interesting textural effects that can go along with your guitar textures. Just a couple ideas there for the drums. And it's not because there's anything wrong with them, but they are distinctly separate from everything else. At least to my ears, because they are the only ones coming out of the production fairly unscathed. There's a bit of production to, shape the EQ and to, put its placement in the song and all that, but it just lacks that grit. It's this is gonna be real weird, but in Star Wars how all the ships are like beat up and dusty and dingy, and that's because George Lucas wanted it to look like this was a real rebel force. They didn't have the money behind them for new stuff, and so it's like if you put like a Battlestar Galactica ship next to like a Star Wars fleet, they're gonna stick out, right? There's nothing wrong with it in its own, but when compared to what's around it. And I think that's what's going on with the drums, is that they're produced well, but with the hyper attention to grit and destruction on everything else, they feel a little out of place. But if you're happy with it, as usual, just stick with the sounds. But if there's been a little nagging feeling, dude, experiment, do it. See what you can do with that drum. Um, Now, I mentioned the atonality in the vocals against the guitars. That actually disappears in our chorus when the vocalist goes full on screaming, I think. That also is harmonized with a double track of something a little closer to spoken word, or at least a spoken range as far as pitch goes. Um, this section actually feels like it lines up into a key with the guitars. I don't know if that's because the guitars are also lining up in a key, and everyone's just kind of coming together for this part, but there's a unification of sound here that isn't present in the atonal verse, and I think it's really neat to bounce between the two of them. The atonality is a bit grating on my ears. I'm just not a big fan of that sound in general, but I think the contrast here is well worth it, and it's not done to such an extent that it reaches a point of being too much, if that makes sense. At least for me, like that's totally subjective, right? Some people are going to hear this and just absolutely love the verse, and might not even know why the chorus doesn't hit as hard for them, and it's probably the tonality versus atonality aspect. Um, But the guitar work and the drum work for both of these sections, and even the vocal work, aside from shifting up to the harsh, is fairly similar. It's a lot of rhythmic ideas focused on texture and atmosphere more so than melody or harmony. Um, and so that made the bridge feel really interesting to me because we went in more of an atmospheric direction that focused on feeling a little bit of tension and eeriness outside of just the raw destruction of the sound. And I thought this was a really nice way to take this because if our A section is atonality and our B section is tonality, our C section actually refines this down even more and says, what if we explored atmosphere outside of grit? And so there's almost a direct movement of this wide angled destruction and trying to find, maybe like trying to find a beauty within it, possibly, or trying to hone down and find something in the center of it, and getting rid of the aspects that make it difficult to view, and trying to find something that is perceptible or tangible at its core. That's what it feels like. It's like having a microscope and zooming in closer and closer and closer and trying to find something amidst the noise. And so I found it to be really interesting how you did that without actually changing much. It's little changes with massive effect, and that is definitely an efficient way to write music. I massively support it. I'm always talking about efficient composition. There's definitely maximalist ways to go about creating differences throughout a song, but I'm a real big fan of finding ways to add nuance and depth to a track with doing less. I think efficient writing is something that we're kind of losing as we have more and more options that are becoming easier to utilize. You know, you have 5,000 instruments in your DAW at any given time, and you can just save your work and keep iterating on it. And there's just such a direction towards maximalism that I think is cool on its own. I'm not saying it's bad. There's no wrong way to make music, but I feel like we're losing a little bit of that direction towards simplicity and efficiency that is really found here. Very cool. And then we wrap it back up with the A and the B. Without the lyrics, though, I did look a little bit. I couldn't find the lyrics. I did find their Bandcamp page, though, and um, very interesting to see how long these guys have been around. You know, it was talking about those seasonal releases. I just didn't think I grasped how many there would be. Um, but I might have to check this out. This was a little much for me in some ways, but interesting in others. How long is this album? I think that would be the key thing here. Is this like a two-take album for me? We're looking at about 40 minutes. Might have to be a two-sitter, two-session. But the description on Bandcamp says exploration of the lust textures of melancholy and depression from Heath Rave of Wolfhammer. Yeah, melancholy and depression. Mostly I get angst in here, but I can kind of feel a melancholic aspect in the vocal delivery as well, which I didn't really touch on too much. But yeah, that lower range general speaking pitch that is utilized throughout both of the sections. In the verse, it's the primary vocal, but in the chorus, it's the harmonized one. It definitely has a bit of a melancholic depressiveness to it, where it's that, you know, I barely have any energy at all to sing this, so it's just going to be whatever takes the least amount of energy. And so, yeah, I mean, that's how I'm walking away from the song is I'm a bit intrigued by it. I am curious what the lyrics are. I'm kind of hoping they fit the grit and destruction of the song itself. But I mean, it's called Gore Orphanage, and that just evokes such imagery that I think it fits with the dirtiness and gnarliness of the track itself. So, those are my thoughts on Lotus Thrones Gore Orphanage. What did y'all think? You know, let me know down in the comments. In the description box, I usually have my links. Instead, we're going to have Lotus Thrones links, their social media, their streaming platforms, anything I can find. Above that, if you could like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And make sure you head on over to Lotus Thrones pages and like and subscribe and whatever interests you. If you want to pick up some merch or just show them some love, give them a couple views, whatever. Make sure you go do that though. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. We got an album review at 5 p.m. EST. Sunday morning EST, we have a live stream for the Patreons. And then Monday, we'll be back with next week's theme, which is title tracks? No, non-typical post-rock. I don't even know what that entails. So that'll be fun, I suppose. Also, tomorrow's album is Haken's Affinity, so I'm sure there's going to be some people pretty happy about that. Anyways, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.